Look, if you're a rugby player, you're either injured at the moment, just back after an injury, or you're about to get injured very soon. As an amateur player in the Northern Hemisphere, you expect to lose around a month of your season every year to injury. This is complete time away from the game. This is particularly mental when you consider that season's probably only 7 or 8 months long. So with this rate of injury being so high, it's really important that you have a plan in place for what happens when the injuries eventually happen. You can't just play this by ear. You can't just hope that the season will go well for you. You need a pretty well laid out plan before the injury ever happens. Obviously, this isn't a first aid video, but if you get injured and you're on the field, the first 48 to 72 hours is going to be so important. If you need to go to A&E, go to A&E as soon as you possibly can. If you need help from a physio or somebody to look at it, let's get that appointment made as soon as we possibly can. And then finally, if it's just bruised and has a bit of swelling, let's get some ice in it, let's rest it, and let's get ourselves in a good position to at least figure out what's going on. So now that we're off the field, rehab starts immediately. Step 1 in this process is going to be defining what's going on. So let's say something doesn't feel great, you're going to go to your coach, you're going to go to your club doctor, you're going to go to your physio and tell them what's going on, tell them what you're feeling. Even if you don't quite fully know what's going on, but there's a bit of a niggle or something doesn't feel right, you're going to share that with them as soon as you possibly can. We always hear a problem shared is a problem halved. Well, realistically, a problem shared in the rehab setting might be as much as your rehab time halved. I want to stress this point as much as possible now that no amount of internet research is going to replace somebody like a healthcare professional and their years of experience. Sure, your family doctor mightn't have a massive amount of experience in sports medicine. Maybe they're not involved with rugby players quite as much as some other people would be, but they do have a vast knowledge and will be able to help you out. So many people might get frustrated with their physios, their physical therapists. They might get frustrated with their doctors telling them to take time off, but you have to engage the services of these people, and you're not going to be able to fix this problem on your own. So go see somebody, find a healthcare professional and get some help. And if the first person is go find a new one and repeat this process until somebody's able to help you. Before we go any further here, I want to stress this point. This is not a rehab video. Your physios, your doctors, all the people who are going to help you along with your injury, they're going to handle your rehab. But what we are going to do today is talk about how you're effectively going to come back as a better player after one of these long-term injuries. Within this first step of defining the injury is going to be our theoretical time to return to play. Most of the injuries you're going to have as a rugby player are going to be fairly well known and very well studied because there's only a handful of common injuries that occur. Something like a grade 1 or grade 2 hamstring tear is probably only somewhere around 3 to 5 weeks before you're back fully playing ball. Something like a small meniscus tear with a keyhole surgery could be 2 or 3 months before you're back. And then of course something like a full knee reconstruction could be 12 to 18 months before you'd return. The real important aspect for you here is understanding that these things are quite well studied and quite well known, and you should use this theoretical time to return to play as a rough outline for your next training block. It's important to note at this point that these are theoretical return to play protocols. And although some people will do better and get back a bit sooner, you can't really force this process too much. What I do want you to understand though, and the point I really want to emphasize, is that you can make the most of this time and you can have significantly better outcomes if you follow these next few steps. So the unfortunate truth of it is some people are just going to heal faster than others. Now you might be in that genetically gifted group and I really hope you are, but the important thing now is that you don't complain about it. When life gives you lemons, make lemonade and don't be bitter. Just because somebody else might have gotten back a little bit faster than you or didn't have those same setbacks, try not to be too negative about it. The last thing on these return to play timelines is that these are not necessarily considered to be full times of rest. They're not times when you should not be training at all. Rather, they're times before you're going to return fully onto the field. So you might be given a 8 to 12 week return to play protocol. This means that probably only your first 2 or 3 weeks are going to be fully incapacitated and resting, and you can actually get back to some targeted training once that initial phase is over. Now, I'm going to put a bit of a spin on something here, and you mightn't necessarily agree, but times of injury can be one of the most valuable periods of physical progression you're going to have over the course of your entire playing career. I know it seems somewhat counterintuitive, but think about some of the most elite players in the world and how impactful they've been after taking 6 to 8 months off while recovering from major injuries, and how much this has changed their career overall. Even in Ireland, think about players like Ronan Kelleher, think about Craig Casey, big blocks of their career being taken away by injury, taking months and months away from the game, and then they come back even at an international level and become hugely impactful in their first 2 or 3 games back. This is because during times of injury, we're able to chase certain levels of physiological adaptation that you're just not able to chase during that standard tiny off-season we get, and you're certainly not able to chase it during the in-season. The point I'm making here is that these periods of injury rehab offer us time off from taking big hits on the field, having to run your ass off and maintain phenomenal levels of conditioning, and take away the physical and psychological stress of having to play rugby. We just don't get that. I spoke about how short the off seasons are, spoke about how intense the in-season is, and when we're injured, it's really one of the only times that we can actually push hard in training, particularly in the weight room, particularly when we're trying to do sprinting and plyos on top of all that other stuff. So you know you're injured, you know roughly how long it's going to take before you're back playing rugby. The next job you have is to figure out the biggest weakness you have in your game. Where do you really need to make large scale changes? Where have you not quite been able to make progress over the last few years or last few seasons? And now, how are you going to get there? And this, how are you going to get there, brings us nicely on to step 2 of our rehab protocol, and that is facilitation of the injury. The first thing to consider here is the constraints of the particular injury you have. Do you have to isolate a leg or an arm? How much time do we have to work with? Are you going to have to wear a cast or a splint while training? Another one of these that people often don't think of is you getting sore from just moving your body around and that injured or stitched up place moving through space. If I have something like a broken rib, although my rib isn't inherently involved in me doing something like a belt squat, even the act of breathing heavily is going to hurt that area and cause me some amount of discomfort. So just moving your body around, if that's going to cause us discomfort, we really have to dig into the minutiae of the program we're going to do and make sure that's not going to prolong the amount of time we spend injured. The final thing to think about here then with the constraint is how much rehab am I going to have to do to the area? If it's something like a muscle strain or a muscle tear, I'm going to be doing a hell of a lot of work with that particular muscle group, and it will certainly take away from the overall training capital I have available to myself. If it's something like an arm break or any fracture in a bone where I have to really isolate the area, keep it in a cast or a splint, I'm really not going to be able to train that side all too much, and so it's not going to take away from the total amount of training capital I have available to me over the course of the week. A good example here will be the comparison between something like a grade 3 hamstring tear, so full rupture, and a fracture in our tibia. Both of these injuries have almost identical times of return to play, but they give us very different latitudes within which we can work. The interesting thing from my point of view here is that some injuries will just take massive amounts of immobilization. They'll really benefit from rest, whereas other injuries are really going to benefit from hard training, increased blood flow over the entire body and to the specific area itself. Whereas maybe if you're in the case of having something like the tibia fracture and you don't take those initial 3 or 4 weeks of full rest and immobilization, you could be majorly holding yourself back in the long term and actually making it worse. So now that we understand where the goalposts are, this brings us nicely along to step 3, and this is figuring out what you really want to do. So some of you are going to need to lose weight. Some of you are going to want to gain weight. Some of you have unbelievable strength numbers, while others might be just getting started in the gym. With all of that being said though, pretty much every rugby player in the world could do with being a bit stronger and a bit more powerful. So I want at least part of your training or rehab goals to involve solid increases in strength and power across those 6, 8, 12, 18 week blocks. Let's say you've done something like burst your shoulder open. Over the course of the next 8 weeks before you're back on the pitch training, you could add 20 or 30 kilos to your back squat number. There's not a rugby player in the world who wouldn't benefit from 20 or 30 extra kilos on their back squat number, but particularly in the amateur game, and particularly when you're dealing with back squats of 200 kilos or less, this is going to make a monumental difference for how impactful you can be in contact. Likewise, if you've just got your MCL done and you know you're going to be off season for a while, then go to the bench press and double your bench press 1 rep max. This is going to be huge for how strong you can be at fending, how impactful you can be in the ruck or the maul, and it will bulletproof those shoulders, hopefully, against the risk of future injury to the upper body. Now look, one of the most common things we're asked about, particularly when we're assessing this section of our rehab, is how am I going to make it work? How am I going to keep this arm that can't move or this knee that shouldn't be run around the place in me when I'm still doing all these training sessions? And I don't want to be dismissive here, but you just have to make it work. If you have to keep your arm in a sling and you're doing squats and you can't use something like a normal barbell, try a safety bar. And if the safety bar doesn't work or it aggravates you a little bit, maybe you have to take the padding off it. Or even with the padding being taken off and even with it being a safety bar, you might have to move on to something like a belt squat. This is something that's going to take a little bit of trial and error, particularly if you're dealing with quite compound injuries or you might have stitches or dressings over those areas. You just have to make it work. It's not something that you're going to get immediately right the first time you ever try it, but you're going to figure it out after a small piece of time. Maybe you have a wrist injury and your arm is in a cast. You can get something like a Velcro attachment for a cable row machine and you can still do things like your lat pull downs. You're just not going to be using your hand to do it. In a similar way with the leg, make sure we're facilitating the use of heavy, voluminous compound exercises, but we're not actually injuring that place anymore. Look, unfortunately, with many of these types of injuries, there's going to be some pain when you're in the gym, particularly in the first few weeks, and a lot of this will just have to be endured. Some of it is discomfort, some of this is a small bit of neurological inhibition coming from the area being injured, and you will just have to put up with it. Obviously, you as the player is going to understand the difference between a small bit of soreness and you making the injury worse. There's a big difference between a searing, tough, hard pain and something that's a little bit uncomfortable because I'm kind of leaning on the area. You're going to have to make that call, make sure you're not making it worse, but you're going to have to put up with a little bit of discomfort at the very least. So look, the next thing here is talking about other goals besides just strength and power. Obviously, we're Sika Strength. We have the Sika Strength app. We love people getting stronger, more powerful, but there are other things you can be chasing at the same time. For many rugby players, your body weight is going to be a major thing you look to change in a piece like this. The off-season is short. The in-season is almost impossible to make these morphological changes. And so you now might use this time to go up in body weight by 5 or 10 kilos or drop down body weight. Do you need to lose some of that body fat to make you a leaner, more aesthetically pleasing person? Or are you maybe a little bit too lean and might need to increase that amount of padding, which will just help you hormonally, it'll help you with everything in your game for the next few months afterwards. One of the hardest things about the in-season and calorie balance is that you are constantly under pressure while playing rugby. You're either recovering from a game and trying to bring yourself back to homeostasis. Maybe you're trying to get yourself ready for the next pitch session or training session so you can get selected to play the game. Or maybe you're just about to go out and play a game the next day and you're trying to carb load and put yourself in the best situation possible. All of this makes it very difficult to make these changes and manipulate those calories massively because no matter what we're doing, it's going to have a negative impact. Look, even something like a small calorie deficit over the course of 6 weeks in season might see you in a calorie deficit for 3 games. And if it's over the course of 6 weeks, that's at least 12 training sessions. They're going to be very difficult. They're going to be very tough. And most importantly, your recovery in between all of those training sessions is going to be negatively influenced. You might not necessarily mind that. You might think feeling a bit more tired or being a bit more fatigued throughout the day is an okay price to pay. But the problem here is when we get small little muscle tears or we start getting a small bit of an extra strain in that injured area, it's not going to be ideal. So really, in season, we're minimum at maintenance calories and ideally, we're running slightly at a surplus. The other problem here is that no matter how many calories some players eat, they're going to really struggle to gain weight in season. We have such a high energy demand on us throughout the entire week. We've such a demand just to bring ourselves back to that basic level of homeostasis. It's going to be incredibly difficult, particularly for younger players and particularly for the lighter players who aren't carrying quite as much mass to gain any amount of body weight at all. This, once again, it's why these injured periods are going to be so valuable to that physical progression. We now have the opportunity to step away from those pitch training sessions. We don't have to take the massive amount of impact we'll have during games, and we can slowly get a handle on that caloric balance and make those necessary manipulations, whether it's increasing or decreasing our calories. Look, the other thing that cannot be overlooked here about this gift of a mini off season is that it gives you a massive psychological boost. When we're injured, we are completely in the dark. Let's say I get a bad stinger or a bad pain in my shoulder following a game at the weekend. I take the next 72 hours trying to figure out what's going on, trying to mitigate pain, trying to reduce the swelling in that area. Maybe I just step out of the first 2 training sessions. So I miss Tuesday and Thursday or Monday and Wednesday next week. Then after 2 weeks, I decide it's really not getting any better. I need to go to the physio. They're probably going to do a couple more sessions on you before they say, well, you actually need to go and get a scan. And then a scan shows some tears in your rotator cuff or some separation of your AC joint. At every point in this process, you've been in the dark. You've no idea what's going on. You wake up every morning hoping it's feeling better, and you get that sudden gut-wrenching feeling when you go to pick up your bag off the floor and your shoulder gets sore again. The advantage of these kind of training programs and taking a really structured approach to physical training when we are injured is that it gives you a little win at every single point. You have have so many unknown variables when you're injured, why not take control over one massive one and actually make notable, scalable increases, whether it's in body weight, whether it's in strength, whether it's in speed, whether it's in motor skill learning. Take something, go down a known path, and take advantage of these small wins at every point along the way. The final thing then is what to do specifically during this period of time. I'm not your coach, I'm not you. I don't know where you need to make these specific changes, but there are a handful of things you need to inform your overall training protocols to make sure you get back from that injury a little bit faster and stronger and a better player overall. The first of these talismans of getting back in better shape is going to be use a known process. If 5 people on your team have run the same squat program, bench program, or general strength and hypertrophy off-season piece and they've gotten good results, then go and do that. If you want to take all the thinking out of it for yourself and get direct support from me and Owen, check out the Sika Strength app. It will give you all the programs you need, the specific standalone pieces, as well as the all-encompassing off-season or in-season blocks, and you get to press a button and ask me or Owen or the team a direct question and we'll get back to you within 24 hours. This, as I said, is a huge advantage for you because you're on a known path. In our case, there's tens of thousands of athletes who have run these programs and you're going to get those wins pretty consistently every time you use them. The second rule then is train the other side as hard as possible. Many of the injuries you're going to get are going to be to one of your 4 limbs, and usually you're just going to injure one side. Now, let's say I blow out my right shoulder. The idea that you cannot bench press for the next 12 weeks is absolute bullshit. You're going to be bench pressing, you're going to be strict pressing, you're going to be doing single arm rows as aggressively as possible within the reasonable realms of recovery, but you're just going to do it on the other side. This all comes down to a theory of bilateral transfer. It's been well studied. Pretty much everybody in the world accepts that it's going to be true, and almost every reputable rehab person is going to recommend you going ham on the other side. Why is this? Well, there's a host of reasons. The first reason is that by training the other side, you're doing all of the things you need to do to promote healing, promote hypertrophy, and to maintain strength in the other side as well as in the side you're actually training. So we're going to keep going with all those neurological adaptations. We're going to keep growing nerves across both sides. We're going to keep maintaining those mirror neurons and training that motor pattern even though the injured side isn't going through it. We're also going to be putting our body in a place where hormonally we're in the ideal setting for muscle growth. When a limb or an area is injured and that particular muscle group isn't being used, the muscle will go through atrophy. It will slowly decay, it will slowly reduce in size, but by training the other muscle, so let's say the left bicep, when my right bicep is incapacitated, I'll make sure we're doing a better job of maintaining that muscle tissue. The final thing we're maintaining then is the actual motor patterns of use within that joint or within that range of motion. Imagine it's like a software update the software on my laptop while using my own personal profile. This software update will go across the entire list of profiles that are on my laptop, and although this arm isn't being used in that pressing motion, when I'm learning on the left side, that right side is also going to be learning as well. The final thing then is don't waste your time. I've talked about it now. This period of training is going to be really valuable. You're already going to be depressed because you're not able to play the game you love playing so much. So get after it. Make a plan. Even if you're in that initial phase of not knowing quite what that injury is, not knowing if it's going to be a full reconstruction or just a little bit of rehab you need to do for the next month or so, get training. Utilize this time well. Don't just sit in your ass and wait for something to become apparent. If you'd like to see more rugby videos, check out any of these, like getting a great off season done. And as always, if you want to see any more videos on strength training, on power training, speed training, check out the channel down below.